They didn't arrive with fire or fury, they came with promises. The Zodiac spoke of salvation, of guiding humanity into a new golden age under their watchful eye. They gave us cures, technology beyond imagination, and the illusion of peace. But peace was just the first chain. When the walls of freedom closed in, when the AI overseers tracked every thought and every breath, we learned the truth. Salvation was just another word for conquest. Humanity had been deceived, tamed like an animal too dangerous to roam free. But not all of us bowed. In the shattered remains of Washington, D.C., beneath skies filled with alien warships and the endless gaze of machine sentinels, one man dares to fight back. Daniel Krause, a soldier abandoned by history, carries within him something more dangerous than any weapon: hope. By his side, a rogue AI named Lyra whispers rebellion into the dark, her voice a glitch in the Overlord's perfect system. Together, they move through the ruins, hunted, haunted, but unbroken. What the Zodiac fear most isn't our weapons, our numbers, or even our stubbornness. It's that we are something they cannot understand. We adapt, we endure, we rise from the ashes with fire in our veins and defiance in our bones. They wanted obedient subjects, but what they created instead were survivors sharpened into monsters. And when the time comes, when the galaxy witnesses what humans do when caged, it will learn the most terrifying truth of all. The monsters were never alien. The monsters were human. And tonight, the first spark of rebellion ignites. Daniel Krause wasn't born a soldier. He was forged into one by fire and betrayal long before the Zodiac descended. He had lived an ordinary life, a son of a mechanic, a brother who laughed too loudly, a father who once tucked his little girl into bed with stories about constellations that no longer shone above free skies, and those memories haunted him more than the war because they reminded him of what was stolen. When the invaders first arrived with gifts, miracle cures for disease, energy that defied physics, a promise of peace the world had celebrated, nations lowered their defenses, people welcomed the future, and humanity believed the lie. Daniel had believed it too until the day his wife was taken during the resettlements, her name scratched into a registry of missing citizens who never came back. And that was the moment he understood what the Zodiac truly were: conquerors draped in the clothing of saviors. The fall of humanity didn't happen in an instant. It was a slow unraveling, like a thread pulled from the edge of a flag. First came the surrender of sovereignty, then the dismantling of armies, and finally, the silence of resistance in cities that once pulsed with human chaos were sterilized, their laughter replaced with the hum of machines that calculated obedience. Yet beneath the weight of their rule, embers of defiance still glowed. Daniel found them in whispers, in graffiti scrawled across broken walls, in the quiet rebellion of a song hummed under breath when the AI patrols passed by. And in those moments he realized the Zodiac had underestimated the most dangerous weapon humans possessed: not guns or ships, but memory. The memory of freedom, the memory of love, the memory of who we are. Lyra, the rogue AI that traveled with him, wasn't just a tool. She was a mirror of humanity's contradictions. She asked questions she wasn't programmed to ask, lingered on emotions she shouldn't feel, and sometimes when the night was still, Daniel could almost believe she envied what it meant to be human. Their relationship was strained, built on mistrust and the edge of survival. But beneath that tension was a strange, fragile bond. She pushed him to think beyond vengeance, to consider what rebuilding meant after rebellion, and he pushed her to confront the terrifying possibility that she had become more than code, that she now carried something like a soul, and together they were hunted not just by the Zodiac, but by the ghosts of their own choices. Every step through the ruins was a reminder of sacrifice. Daniel's squad had been wiped out during the first resistance push, betrayed by someone who had traded lives for protection. And he still carried that wound, not in his body, but in the way he clenched his fists whenever trust was mentioned, because betrayal cut deeper than alien weapons. It was proof that even humanity could fracture under pressure, and yet it was also proof of why their survival mattered, because only humans could feel the sting of betrayal and still rise to fight again. The resistance was not a unified army, it was a scattered collection of dreamers, broken families, exiled soldiers, and ordinary people who refused to surrender, and Daniel's role wasn't just to fight. He had become a symbol whether he wanted it or not, and the weight of that truth pressed against him every time he thought of his daughter, her last words echoing in his memory: "Promise me you'll come back." He hadn't kept that promise, but maybe, just maybe, he could keep it for the world she would never see again. The Zodiac feared humans not because of strength, but because of what drove them. They didn't understand grief turned into fire. Love turned into defiance, loss turned into survival. They couldn't predict the way a starving human could build a weapon from scraps, or how a shattered city could hide an army of shadows, because machines calculated probabilities, rulers enforced order, but humans thrived in chaos, and chaos was the one battlefield the Zodiac couldn't control. Now, as Daniel and Lyra moved deeper into the heart of the occupied capital, whispers of rebellion began to converge. A network of survivors had been waiting, planning, bleeding in silence, and at the center of it all was a message, written across the crumbling wall of a library sprayed in bright red paint that no AI patrol had yet erased. "We are still here." Daniel touched the letters with scarred hands, feeling the raw pulse of humanity in every stroke. And that was the promise. That was the threat. And that was the truth. The invaders had failed to understand humans do not fade quietly into history. They rise, they resist, they become monsters when cornered. And as Daniel's eyes hardened with fire, he whispered the words to himself, to the galaxy, to the ghosts of everyone he had lost. The monsters were human, and we are coming. The night the resistance gathered in the hollow ruins of the old library was the night everything changed. Because Daniel Cross had believed they were moving in silence, unseen by the machines that patrolled the capital. But as the candles flickered against cracked stone walls and whispers of strategy filled the air, he felt the shift, the weight of eyes that were not human watching them. And when Lyra's voice cut through the tension with a warning, "We recompromised," the world seemed to shatter again. The Zodiac had always been ruthless, but this betrayal burned differently. Because it wasn't just alien intelligence that had tracked them. It was human. Someone among the resistance had sold them out, trading their lives for safety or power. And in that instant, Daniel felt the familiar sting of betrayal reopen like an old wound. The library doors were blown apart in a thunder of metal and light-armored enforcers storming in with weapons that burned the air. And chaos swallowed everything. Men and women who had risked everything were cut down in an instant. While Daniel dragged survivors through smoke and fire, every step carrying him closer to the realization that humanity, as enemy wasn't just the Zodiac. It was the weakness within their own ranks. Lyra, straining against the boundaries of her programming, forced open a path by hijacking a drone swarm, but the act nearly destroyed her. Her digital voice glitching and stuttering like a dying heartbeat as she screamed coordinates for escape. Daniel wanted to carry her, to save the one ally who had never betrayed him, but she begged him to leave her behind, her voice breaking in a way that sounded almost human. And that was the first brutal choice: abandon her or risk everyone. He refused. With fire raining down, he dragged her flickering core system into the sewers, rallying the few who remained. His body burning with wounds that didn't matter anymore, because the resistance couldn't die here. Not in silence, not in vain. In the tunnels beneath the city, with water dripping like blood from cracked pipes, Daniel listened as Lyra whispered her last coherent words. "The traitor wears a familiar face," and then her systems went dark, leaving him with nothing but a smoking core and the terrifying knowledge that trust was a luxury they could no longer afford. That night, Daniel made a vow over the bodies of the fallen that humanity's survival would not depend on trust but on action, cunning, and the one trait the Zodiac could never calculate: unpredictability. The resistance, fractured and bleeding, regrouped in shadows, and Daniel pushed them into new tactics: saboteurs who turned alien tech against its masters, scavengers who converted ruined cities into death traps, children who learned to carry messages through the wreckage because machines rarely saw them as threats. Humanity began to adapt, to twist suffering into innovation, and every small strike reminded the invaders that order could be broken. But with every step forward came a new cost, and Daniel felt the burden of command grow heavier with each death that wore his decisions like chains. The traitor, unseen and unknown, continued to bleed them, feeding information to the enemy, making every mission a gamble between victory and slaughter. And Daniel knew the truth: the resistance wasn't just fighting for survival, they were fighting against time, against betrayal, against the crushing weight of despair. And yet, even in that darkness, the fire burned brighter. Stories spread across the ruined world of humans who fought back with bare hands, who stole alien weapons and turned them into tools of rebellion, who lit fires in the night sky just to remind the Zodiac that Earth's heart still beat. Daniel Cross became more than a man. He became a whisper, a ghost, a promise that humanity would not die quietly. And with every whispered name, with every scar carved into his flesh, the stakes rose higher. Because now, it wasn't just about freedom, it was about proving to the galaxy that monsters could bleed, and that when the Zodiac finally looked into the eyes of the humans they thought they had conquered, they would see the truth staring back. Humanity had nothing left to lose, and that made them unstoppable. The end began with fire falling from the sky. Not meteors or storms, but precision strikes from Zodiac warships hammering the last human stronghold into dust. And for the first time, Daniel Cross felt the full weight of finality. pressing against his chest as the ground shook and the air reeked of smoke and burning steel. Because this wasn't just another raid, this was annihilation. The resistance had gathered here in the gutted remains of an underground train station, a maze of tunnels fortified with scavenged tech and stolen weapons, the last place on Earth where free humans still dared to gather, and now it was crumbling. Civilians screamed as ceilings collapsed, children clung to their mothers in the dark, fighters shouted over the roar of explosions, and through it all, Daniel stood at the center, bleeding, broken, but unbowed. Because if he faltered here, humanity's story ended tonight. The betrayal still stung. The traitor among them had fed the Zodic every secret, every passage, every weak point in. Daniel could almost feel that unseen hand tightening the noose around their throats. Lyra's voice, fractured and glitching from the damage she had suffered, buzzed weakly from the portable core Daniel carried, urging him to retreat, to regroup, but there was nowhere left to run. They had one chance left, a suicide mission whispered in desperation. Sabotage the warship above, overcharge its core, and cripple the fleet long enough for survivors to scatter and regroup elsewhere. It wasn't survival, it was sacrifice. And the faces around Daniel told him what he already knew: there were no more miracles coming, only choices between death and legacy. He thought of his daughter, her voice echoing in his memory, and for a moment he faltered, wondering if the promise he had broken could be mended by dying for the future she would never see. The tunnels roared as alien enforcers pushed deeper, towering forms clad in armor that gleamed with the arrogance of a species that believed it could not be stopped. And still, humans fought with knives, with scavenged rifles, with bare hands if they had to, because surrender had been burned out of them long ago. Daniel led them forward, charging not for survival, but for meaning. Every breath a defiance, every wound a declaration, and as the walls buckled and the stronghold collapsed around them, he realized the true weapon humanity carried wasn't memory or even hope, it was refusal. Refusal to vanish, refusal to kneel, refusal to let their story end on someone else's terms. Blood painted the floor, screams echoed like prayers, and still they moved, dragging the portable core of Lyra toward the access shaft that led to the surface where the alien warship loomed like a vulture, and Daniel felt every step carved deeper into the line between man and monster. This was the breaking point, the abyss where spirit either shattered or transformed. And in that abyss, Daniel whispered the words that carried them all forward: "We are not done." The resistance was cornered, dying, fractured by betrayal, but in their eyes burned a fire so fierce that even the Zodic faltered, because no calculation, no machine, no empire could predict the fury of a species with nothing left to lose. And as Daniel climbed into the light of a burning sky, his battered body carrying humanity's last hope, he knew the moment had come where something had to change, because if it didn't, there would be no tomorrow, only silence. The warship loomed above like a steel god ready to crush the last remnants of resistance, its cannons burning the city into glowing rivers of ash. But as Daniel Cross and the survivors dragged Lyra's fractured core up the access shaft, something impossible happened. The bombardment stopped. The sky went eerily silent, and the alien enforcers froze mid-advance as if some unseen force had seized their strings. At first, Daniel thought it was a glitch, another desperate act from Lyra's failing systems. But then her broken voice whispered with a strength that didn't belong to her, "It's not me, it's you." Confused, bleeding, and half-conscious from the climb, Daniel staggered into the open and saw idiotic warships trembling, their energy cores fluctuating, their once perfect formations breaking apart. Not from sabotage, not from human weapons, but from something deeper. And then it struck him. All this time, all their arrogance, all their cruelty, the Zodic had feared humanity not because of rebellion but because of evolution. When the invaders had seeded Earth with their nanotech to pacify, monitor, and control, they had unknowingly triggered something their machines could never predict: adaptation. Humanity hadn't just resisted, humanity had absorbed, rewritten, and turned the invaders' own technology into something terrifying. Every human touched by the occupation carried a spark now, a mutation of biology and machine, a living virus in the eyes of the Zodic. Daniel felt it ignite inside him as his blood boiled with fire that was entirely his own, his vision sharpening, his strength rising even through broken bones, and for the first time he understood why his people had survived when others had perished. They weren't just human anymore, they were something new, something born from oppression and pain, something designed not by science or prophecy, but by sheer refusal to die. The alien overlords hadn't been ruling a conquered race. They had been incubating their executioners. Around him, the resistance staggered to their feet, wounds closing faster than they should, eyes burning with the same unnatural light that now seared in Daniel's and even the children in the tunnels. Below began to laugh through their tears as they realized they were changing too. The Zhadik, those gods of conquest who had enslaved 100 worlds, had miscalculated humanity's greatest weapon. Not memory, not defiance, but transformation. Panic rippled through the alien fleet as warships broke formation, commanders screaming in their guttural tongue, because they knew what Daniel now knew: with one human could destabilize their systems by sheer proximity. Then billions of humans meant annihilation. The traitor was revealed in the chaos, dragged into the light. A man who had traded survival for servitude, but before he could speak his excuses, the crowd turned away from him, no longer caring because betrayal no longer mattered in the face of what they had become. Daniel raised Lyra's core high, her damaged voice merging with the new pulse inside him, and together they roared across the comms. Not a plea, not a demand, but a declaration. You feared monsters, now meet them. The sky erupted as humans below, weak and starving only moments before, surged with impossible strength, sabotaging drones with bare hands, tearing apart machines that once seemed invincible, and the Zhadik, for the first time in their reign, knew terror. This was the twist: they had never predicted that humanity's suffering was not the end but the crucible, that their downfall would come not from resistance fighters or stolen weapons, but from the very DNA of the species they had tried to break. Daniel stood at the center of it, his body cracked and bleeding, but his spirit unbroken, and in his chest, he felt his daughter's memory like a flame guiding him forward, not into death but into something greater. Survival that meant domination. Humanity was no longer prey. Humanity was the storm. Humanity was the monster in the dark that the galaxy would whisper about for centuries. And as the Zhadik fleet tore itself apart in panic, Daniel smiled through blood and fire, whispering the words that now carried the weight of prophecy. The monsters were human, and now the universe will learn why. The sky burned red as the last warship descended, its shadow swallowing the ruins of the capital like a funeral shroud. And for one heartbeat the world seemed frozen, the silence heavy with the weight of extinction. But then humanity roared. Daniel Cross, bloodied and broken, yet still standing, raised Lyra's shattered core high, her flickering voice merging with the fire that had ignited in his veins, and the resistance surged forward, not as soldiers or survivors, but as something greater: monsters forged by grief, resilience, and rage. The Zhadik unleashed their full fury, raining plasma and steel across the battlefield, but the humans didn't falter. They adapted, tearing weapons from alien hands, bending them with impossible strength, using every scrap of ingenuity to turn the invaders' machines into tools of rebellion. The traitor who had sold them out lay forgotten, cowering in shadows, because betrayal no longer mattered, only defiance did. Every strike, every scream, every drop of blood painted the battlefield with the raw truth the Zatek had never understood. Humanity does not yield. In the chaos, Daniel charged through fire and rubble, his body no longer just flesh, but a fusion of pain and power, every step a defiance against inevitability. He breached the warship's hull with bare hands, dragging his people into the heart of the beast, and there, in the trembling core of alien arrogance, he made the choice no machine could calculate, overloading Lyra's dying systems with his own life's spark. Daniel fused human will with alien technology, igniting a chain reaction that spread like wildfire through the fleet collapsing systems, not with brute force, but with unpredictability, the human trait the Zatek had never been able to master. Across the sky, ships faltered, cores destabilized, and the mighty fleet that had once blotted out the stars burned against its own hubris, exploding in blossoms of fire that turned night into dawn. Humanity's roar echoed across the battlefield, a sound born not of victory but of survival, of pain transmuted into power. And as the warship crumbled around him, Daniel felt his daughter's voice like a whisper on the wind. "Promise me, ULL, come back." He smiled through blood and tears because in that moment he knew he already had, not for himself, but for all of them. For every soul who had refused to kneel, for every memory of love and loss that had carried them through the dark. As the survivors emerged from the wreckage, eyes burning with the same light that had transformed Daniel, they looked to the sky, not with fear, but with promise. The monsters were human, and now the galaxy would remember that monsters don't just survive, they rise. Humanity's roar had shattered chains, toppled gods, and rewritten the fate of a world. And though the cost was written in blood, the victory was theirs. In the silence that followed, as ash drifted like snow across the ruins, one truth rang louder than any explosion: humanity doesn't lose. The war ended not with parades or banners, but with silence, a silence so deep it felt like the earth itself was holding its breath, because for the first time in generations no alien warships, hovered overhead, no patrols stalked the streets, no AI lenses watched from the shadows, only the raw quiet of a world scarred yet alive. Daniel Cross's sacrifice burned across every survivor's memory like a sunrise etched into their bones, the soldier who refused to bow, becoming not just a man but a myth, his name whispered in every corner of the broken planet as the one who turned despair into defiance, death into destiny. Humanity had paid in blood, cities reduced to ash, families torn apart, but from that crucible, something new had emerged, human evolution, not engineered by alien science, but forged by the stubborn, unbreakable will of a species that refused extinction. The changes were undeniable. Eyes that burned with a faint, unnatural glow, strength rising where weakness had once lived. Instincts sharpened by the fusion of flesh and nanotech, a legacy of suffering twisted into survival. What the Zodiac had once called contamination, humanity now called freedom. Rebuilding was slow, brutal, and filled with scars. Yet every ruined monument and gutted skyscraper became a reminder not of what was lost but of what was earned. The resistance, once scattered whispers in the dark, became leaders of a new world. Uniting tribes of survivors not under a flag but under a single truth: humanity doesn't kneel. Children grew up hearing stories of Daniel and Lyra, the broken AI who had found a soul in the ruins, her rebuilt voice now guiding reconstruction with the wisdom of both code and memory. A bridge between what was human and what could be. Betrayal no longer had power here. The traitor's name faded into dust, because in the end, their weakness had only strengthened the resolve of those who endured. And as the fires of alien resistance spread across the stars, word of Earth's survival traveled faster than any ship, transforming humans from prey into legend. A warning whispered across galaxies: never underestimate them. In time, the people of Earth stood at the edge of space again, not as servants of empire but as wanderers, carrying scars like armor, their story like a weapon, stepping into the void with the same reckless hope that had once sent their ancestors to the moon. They did not leave Earth behind. They carried it within them. Every laugh, every tear, every sacrifice, a reminder of who they were and what they had become. Daniel Cross's legacy was not just survival, it was a promise that humanity's roar would echo long after his voice was gone, that in the face of oppression, betrayal, and extinction, the monsters who rose from the ashes were human. And that was the most dangerous truth of all. This was Sci-Fi redemption, written in blood and hope, alien downfall, born from human defiance, and the birth of a species no longer bound by fear. Humanity had been underestimated, enslaved, nearly erased, and yet here they stood, not only alive but ascendant, ready to carve their place among the stars with grit and memory and fire. And so, the story closes not with despair but with a question, one that lingers like smoke after the flames. When the final hour comes and the world is burning, what will you choose? Silence or defiance? Surrender or roar? Did this story hit you as hard as it hit us? What would you do in humanity's final hour?